Has this ever happened to you? Well, right now on the camera, I see a red light. But have you ever sat at a red light on the road, and maybe it's late at night, and there's no traffic coming, but you're sitting there for what seems like an eternity and wondering why the light is red if there's no traffic coming? Or, here's another one that we could all relate to. When you get up in the morning and go about your daily business, going to work, or on the weekend going shopping or going to the movies, or do you ever really think about how you're getting from point A to point B? No. Well, with me on this show is somebody whose job is to think long and hard about these things so that we don't have to. I'm Bruce A. Parr, and you're watching Hudson Valley WXYZ with Bruce the Blog. Hudson Valley WXYZ with Bruce the Blog is brought to you by Chase Media Group, provider of multimedia marketing solutions for an omni-channel marketplace, and publisher of the Penny Saver and one of the largest commercial printers in the lower Hudson Valley. And I always like to thank the CEO of Chase Media Group, Carla Chase, and the Chief Strategy Officer, Frank J. Rich, for bringing the show to you, not only on Cablevision, which you may be watching it on now, but also on YouTube. And you can go to YouTube Townlink TV or Bruce the Blog, use those search phrases, and you'll see all of our episodes come up. And I'm really happy to be talking on this show with somebody I've known for many years, Phil Grealy. We both happen to be Yorktowners, although I move around a lot these days. So but Yorktown is my base of operation. And what I was saying at the outset of the show, is a relatable experience, whether it's at a stoplight or just how we go about our business. But when you're talking about the world around us, that's really what we're talking about on this show, the world around us, buildings and shopping and roads and bridges and all those things. And Phil is a principal of the transportation division with Mazer Consulting, which is a engineering firm that deals with all of these things. And Phil and I were talking, it's what used to be called, at least in my youth, Phil, a civil engineer, right?
Correct.
And basically you do deal with how people, right, get from point A to point B in as convenient and unstressful and safe manner as possible.
Correct. My background is a civil engineer, but my specialty is transportation engineering. Right. Primarily traffic engineering, highway design, roadway design, and moving safely pedestrians, passenger cars, and mass transit.
Right.
Everybody drives, so everybody's a traffic engineer, but there's a lot of planning, there's a lot of design features that are behind anything, because today we're a society that is mobile, so whether you're driving a car or riding a bicycle or walking, you need to move from point A to point B.
Right.
And most people prefer to have the most efficient and most unstressful event of moving from point A to B, and it doesn't always happen that way.
Right. And I like what you said. I like that analogy, so to speak, that everybody's a traffic engineer. Of course, some people who are traffic engineers in that regard could maybe go back to school, because I don't have a lot of patience when people on the road don't signal when they change lanes and don't put their headlights on when they're supposed to. But anyhow, that's a whole other matter. But before we get on to talking about some of the projects that you're working on, Phil, I don't want to leave people in suspense, so to speak. And what I was saying at the outset about traffic lights, and everybody has, or almost everybody has that experience of wondering why it's taking so long. If you could just mention for a moment right now what you were telling me about adaptive traffic lights, so people know there's some hope ahead.
Absolutely.
Yeah, in terms of that.
Well, the history of traffic signals, we started with what were called fixed time traffic signals. A fixed time traffic signal was a mechanical controller that allocated a fixed amount of time to an approach at an intersection. So if you had a four-way intersection, you have two phases. If it was a 60-second cycle, you could have 30 seconds allocated to each, or it could be 40 and 20, or vice versa. In any case, that in the late 60s, 70s, transformed into what we called actuated traffic signals, or semi-actuated traffic signals, which were the event of computerization of the controller of the signal, which would allow mechanical devices, electrical devices to be installed in the pavement that would allow the computer to know that there was a demand on a particular approach. So over the last 40 or 50 years, that has now become more efficient. We've gone from semi-actuated to fully actuated, and a fully actuated signal would be detectors in every lane of traffic,
right.
Push buttons for pedestrians. We've gone down to different types of detection, video camera detection, because of the speed and the efficiency of computers now. A lot more information can be processed, and the controller, which is basically a computer,
right.
That controls either an individual intersection or multiple intersections in a corridor, can be more responsive to the demands. The future, which has now started, is what we call adaptive technology. And adaptive technology is where there are actuation, and when I talk about actuation, whether it be a loop detector, people may see what saw cut as a rectangular box in the pavement. That's a loop detector that's
right.
cut in there. There's also individual probes that are installed. There's all different types of actuation. Now we've gone to more video detection.
In the lights.
Which are in the lights. You'll see cameras
right.
at intersections. Those cameras are multi-purpose, but primarily they're there for detection, and it will allow the computer, the controller, to know not only is someone waiting, but how far does that queue extend?
Right.
How many cars are waiting on an approach? And it allows processing of that information. So if I have a very busy intersection where I have cameras, actuation on every approach at different times of the day, under different circumstances, I can be more adaptive to that current
right.
situation. Right now, most traffic signals, if they're not old fixed time signals, which there still are some around, would be either semi-actuated or actuated. And they are programmed with a specific time sequence for different times of the day. So it may be from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. is one sequence. On the weekends or in the evening is another sequence.
Right.
The adaptive allows that system to be more responsive to immediate demands.
Right.
So for example, if I get a surging effect of high school event letting out, for example,
right.
I'm not going to set the pattern for the entire hour, but the adaptive signal would allow you to be responsive to that event occurring.
So you're saying, so let's say the traffic light for the cars exiting the high school campus may stay green quite a long time.
That's
right?
correct.
To let everybody
it would allow
exit.
that to move.
Right. Yeah,
and
that's great.
Downstream there may be another signal, which in the sense of interconnecting or coordinating these adaptive systems
Right.
is there's no sense letting traffic, for example, if I take 202 in Yorktown and the high school lets out, and if the signal isn't tied in with what's happening at 132, then I can get the traffic out of the high school, but they may be stopped
People
at
on 132, right,
So it
yeah.
all has to,
Yeah. Be
react
coordinated, right.
and be coordinated.
But I could also imagine that would be a great benefit at a sports stadium after a
Absolutely.
baseball game, a football game, or something like
Absolutely.
that. Yeah. And when you mentioned, by the way, the button on the poles when you're at a corner crossing, you're saying they
Push
actually
button.
work, because there are people who will swear it's a placebo. Makes you feel good, but it doesn't really affect.
Yeah.
But you're saying they do work. They're connected
Pedestrian
to.
actuation
Right, is real, right, okay.
Assuming that they're functioning, but now they're more efficient, they're better, over length of time. There's less maintenance with them, but yeah, they do
Right.
work.
Which I think what happens is people, especially people like me, they think that as soon as you press it, the light's going to change, and that's not the way it
not
works. Right. That's not the way it
instantaneous.
works. Right. So let's talk, Phil, about a couple of projects in this area that people may even live near. For example, in Ossining, on Route 9, you were talking about the Avalon residences.
Yes.
Right. And you're working on that.
Just a little background in terms of doing traffic studies and coming up with designs, and whether you eventually get to signal installations.
Right.
Our work focus is both private development and also for municipalities. For example, in this project I'm going to talk about, we were the consultant to the applicant that was redeveloping a property and going through approvals with the end result, the construction of the project. We also do reviews for municipalities where we review applications to make sure that what is planned is being planned properly in terms of access and safety and traffic flow.
So where it's not your project.
Correct.
Right,
So
yeah,
we're
right.
reviewing on behalf of the municipality.
Right.
And so, for example, I'm a special consultant to the town of Eastchester, to the village of Dobbs Ferry, where we will review applications.
Right.
In other municipalities, we represent developers, and whether it be a residential development, a retail development, institutional development, there's all different parameters, but it's basically dealing with what traffic flow is there, what pedestrian flows are there, what kind of mass transit facilities, and how do you integrate that to provide access to a development that will have the least amount of impact on surrounding areas, and also provide safe access to and from those properties.
So you deal, of course, also with zoning boards, right?
Absolutely.
A lot.
Zoning,
And planning boards.
boards,
Right.
yes.
Yeah.
That's
Right.
my life.
Yes.
Another town, another night.
Right.
But the one project we talked about is now constructed in Ossining, on Route 9, on the village of Ossining. It was a redevelopment site. The property was the north end of the village, north of Snowden Avenue. On the west side, it was a former office building, was redeveloped for Avalon rental apartments. And at the time, when we started looking at it, was where's the point of access going to be on Route 9?
9, right.
And Route 9 is a heavy traffic corridor, especially in commuter hours. That section has over 1,500 vehicles an hour in both directions. So you first thing you look at is, what do I need in terms of vehicular access?
Right.
And then you look at pedestrian access, mass transit access. We have the B-Line bus system runs along that stretch. So the particular project, again, from a traffic flow standpoint, we needed to make sure we could accommodate people at the driveway.
And how many units are there?
And there's about 200 dwelling
So
units,
that's
I believe, in
significant,
that.
right? Very significant.
You look at the amount of traffic that would be generated, and the first thing is, okay, I need to put in a turn lane, because I need
Right.
to, when someone wants to make a left turn into that project, I don't want to hold up the through traffic. I need
Right,
to
which
keep the traffic flowing.
gets people very
Yes.
upset. Yeah. And by the way, Richard, as Phil's talking about this, that's one of the right,
Yes, we actually
design
have
graphics.
some graphics.
Is that it? Is that the one?
This is the graphic
For Avalon, or?
for Avalon.
Yeah.
There are 3 diagrams. The top diagram was the pre-existing conditions. That was probably a photo from around 2010. The property we're talking about is on the left side of the diagram, which would be the west side of Route 9. You can see a structure there that was a office structure. And
that large building, the roof,
yes.
Right.
And that section of Route 9 was one travel lane in each direction, some sidewalks, a bus stop that was out of somewhat antiquated. The next plan below that is actually an intersection design plan. And
that's
plan,
what you do, right?
Would be the design work that
right.
we do. And that's a relatively simple design. But in order to do that, you have to get accurate survey information, which identifies where property boundaries are, where existing structures are, where telephone and other utilities are located, where sidewalks are and where they should be. So that design was to develop a turn lane, develop an access into this property, reconstruct and bring up the current standards, the bus stop, and build new sidewalks.
Now, when you're doing that design, Phil, the one in the middle, are you working with a budget from either the municipality with things that have to be improvements, or from the developer? I mean,
typically what happens is in any development project, a developer comes in and he looks at access, infrastructure in terms of utilities, gas service, electric service, and what his cost would be to develop a property. So smart developers usually bring the infrastructure people in early on. They'll bring in a traffic engineer.
Like you.
And they'll say, okay, what am I looking at here? Well, you're going to have to do a turn lane.
Right.
And because once we touch the road, we have to bring it up to current standards. And that's a state highway, so we have to deal with the state. So there's an approval process.
Right.
So in addition to the local municipal approvals, you have to have permits from the New York State Department of Transportation.
And that's where it gets real interesting, right?
And you have to interact with utility companies.
Right.
So in this case, a developer would say, okay, Phil, you're telling us I need to do this improvement. Well, what am I looking at here? Well, you could be $500,000, okay? So put in your budget $500,000. If that makes sense, now you can go ahead with your project.
Right.
If that breaks the bank, then you better find another site.
Right. And how long does it take? We were talking about permits and approvals from every level of government, right? State
Yes.
and municipality and maybe county. So how long does it take from the time you do that design, that draft,
Yes.
to the time you get the approvals, not even begin construction? How long does the approval process
The
typically
approval
take?
process will vary. On most process, there's certain requirements in terms of the state environmental review process, seeker.
And we should explain that, because that comes up a lot, especially for people. In every community you have people who, and this is a very good thing, and there should be more people like this, but it's up to each individual, who are very vested in what goes on in their community.
Absolutely.
With developments. And listen, the people are going to come out in favor of it, opposed to it, which is fine if there are valid reasons for opposing it and they're well researched. And so they'll hear phrases like SECRA. So explain.
Okay, the seeker is an acronym for the State Environmental Quality Review Act.
So it's really SEQRA. Right?
That's correct. And the purpose of seeker was to have a standard that all municipalities would use. And in the state of New York, the seeker process was established so that you would be able to come in to a municipality and identify areas of potential impacts. And they could be anywhere from drainage impacts to traffic impacts, to if you're redeveloping a site, are there pre-existing conditions that need to be addressed? Archaeological, if you're a virgin property, was this property used for something in the past that we should know about?
Right.
So, that I'm not, my specialty is not to deal with all the issues, but in development world, you go through that process. So the seeker process identifies potential impacts. A local municipality will then get what's called an environmental assessment form with an application. And they will have to determine, are more studies needed or focus studies in addition to that environmental assessment form. So for example, you could submit an environmental assessment form. I know that I have a traffic issue. I need to attach a traffic study. There may be drainage problems, so I would have to attach a drainage study.
Right.
If there are multiple areas of significant impact, then you would go into an environmental impact statement. And an environmental impact statement is a process where you have public hearings to listen to all the different areas that may be potentially impacted.
And how
you identify what's the scope of what the applicant needs to study in that process.
Right. And how, my question there with SECRA, Phil, is how binding is it? Is it an advisory that then the municipality acts on or interprets in its own way?
The SECRA process it's still left to the municipality.
Right,
okay?
home rule,
it's
so
home
to speak.
Rule.
Right, yeah.
But if impacts are identified that aren't mitigated, then you have to mitigate impacts. So if a certain impact is identified, unless what's called the lead agency. So what happens is in SECRA, and again, this is a very quick synopsis, whether it be the planning board or a town board or a zoning board, they can become the lead agency depending on what the situation is. If it's a rezoning of property, typically it would be the town board or the village board because that requires an action by them.
Right.
If it's merely reviewing a site plan, typically a planning board would be the lead agency. And the lead agency then takes on the responsibility to make sure that these items are addressed. And at the end of the day, the lead agency, in this case, say the planning board, would have to come up with a SECRA resolution. Either they found that there was, that all impacts would be addressed
Resolved,
by the plan,
right.
or that there were some that were identified that couldn't be mitigated, but they were mitigated to the maximum extent practicable.
Right.
So there's different levels there.
But then in each case, or most cases, does the town board or city council vote on that, or
there would be a
Right.
vote as
Right.
to whether or not they find that the end result. And if you were in an environmental impact statement, there's what's called a findings document. So if you're in that process, the findings would spell out what needs to be completed for that particular project, whether it be traffic improvements, drainage improvements, other infrastructure improvements, upgrading electrical service to an area. So the findings would actually spell out what's required in order for that development to proceed.
right?
And
And then there's costs involved. And,
absolutely.
Right, yeah, right.
So it really sets the outline so that when, let's say, the building inspector has to make sure that that site plan was built in accordance, well, first of all, the site plan approval would have the conditions listed. They would be noted on the plan, but the basis for that framework would be the findings from the environmental process.
Right, okay. Right.
So, getting back to your question of how long a process, for this Avalon project was probably a 2 to 2.5 year process of approvals, but that also involved permitting from the state, public hearings, some of the initial work that was done. Then you're talking about the construction of the improvements, coordination with utilities. So
Right.
you're talking about over, probably a 3 to 4 year period of when it was first thought about to when it actually got built.
Right.
Some projects are done in a year,
Right.
some 2 years, some 5 years, some 10 years. There's changing economies, there's financing issues. You may have a good project, you get your approvals, but your financing may not, come to
I was going to say they
fruition.
run out of money.
They run
right?
out of money.
Yeah, right.
So, it varies. It
Right.
really does vary. But, from a development standpoint or a developer's standpoint, They want to get done as soon as possible, of course, because time is money.
When they need to make back what the cost and profits.
Absolutely.
And actually, believe it or not, Phil, we're getting near to the end of the show. It goes by very fast. But one thing I think a lot of people would be very interested in,
Yes.
that you and I were discussing beforehand, I just wanted you to talk about, but not in a roundabout way, is roundabouts.
Yes.
And I was talking about, in my recent travels to a play I'm in Haverstraw from Westchester, so that's going from West, I take the Bear Mountain
Yes.
Bridge, and I go through two what I called roundabouts, and you quickly corrected me to say, no, those are traffic circles. Yes. So what's the difference between like the Bear Mountain traffic circle and a roundabout, which you say are now becoming more popular in your work?
Yes. A traffic circle was a higher speed design that was really, it's the same idea as a roundabout, to move traffic without having to put in a traffic signal where you have, in most cases, heavy flows. Roundabouts serve two functions. They calm traffic. You hear the words traffic calming.
C-A-L-M.
C-A-L-M-I-N-G,
right.
Okay? Calming is that you keep traffic flowing, but you control speeds. It's safer for vehicles, for pedestrians, et cetera, et cetera. So the roundabouts, which are more commonplace now and will continue to be, are an alternative to a traffic signal in some locations. Just recently completed up in Dutchess County on Route 55, the state DOT finished the project where they installed 3 roundabouts in about a less than 2 mile stretch.
Wow.
And
then of course in New Jersey they're ubiquitous.
Yes.
Right.
But the purpose of the roundabouts is to move traffic, calm traffic down, provide defined paths. In the older traffic circles, there's an awful lot of pavement usually.
Yeah.
And people are moving.
Right.
And so this is to keep it more
It
orderly.
looks like bumper cars.
And typically in the roundabout design now, there's what we call an inner circle, which would be to accommodate larger vehicles such as trucks.
Right.
So most roundabouts would handle passenger cars very easily, and you would have an inner raised area that is still mountable, but it would be for trucks making maneuvers.
Right.
So
That's a very clever solution too. Well, I mean, we really have run out of time. It's amazing. We could do like a whole series of shows on this because
Absolutely.
there is no end to the subject matter. And though infrastructure sounds like a dry term when you hear it out of context, I think as people watching this hopefully have gleaned, there's a lot about what you do that relates to everybody. I mean, what you do basically is you work on a human scale, right?
Absolutely.
That's what your business is. So anyhow, thanks very much, Phil. And we've been talking with Phil Grealy, the principal of the Transportation Division at Maser Consulting. And thank you for watching Hudson Valley WXYZ with Bruce the Blog. Be careful out there when you're driving. And remember, when Bruce the Blog listens, people talk. Thank you. He goes very fast.
yes.